something beside me, a light to the kerosene, and the places aren't real anymore, and the faces don't say anything, in the silent light of the mind-blown sphere. It's a game, Devil's Chess Club. Devil's Chess Club.
Welcome to Devil's Chess Club. I'm Aaron Good. Today I'm going to be speaking with Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson. As most of our regular listeners probably know, Lawrence Wilkerson is a retired U.S. Army colonel and the former Chief of Staff to U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell during the first George W. Bush administration. Devil's Chess Club is part of the American Exception podcast. Today's episode is free, but if you appreciate serious, deep political research and analysis, consider subscribing to the American Exception podcast on Patreon. We have over 200 episodes and counting. For people who want to better understand things like the JFK assassination, as well as other aspects of the deep history of the U.S. empire, American Exception is the place to go. The URL is patreon.com/American Exception. Subscribe if you can, and either way, please kindly like this video and subscribe to this American Exception channel. Colonel Larry Wilkerson, it's great to have you back.
Good to be with you, Aaron.
So I suppose that the question facing us and humanity really is this genocidal slaughter in Gaza that is pursuing unabated. And where do you think that it stands now here as we approach the end of May? I mean, is there a light at the end of the tunnel, or how can we or anyone do anything about this?
As far as the monster who's directing it, Bibi Netanyahu, it stands at the, quote, sustained military presence / operation, unquote, that the Knesset blessed and his cabinet blessed, especially Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, one of the things that held his cabinet together once again. As long as that's going on, we're looking at, explained by Netanyahu as the total destruction of Gaza, every edifice in it, and the driving of the Palestinians out into wherever he can put them. And he's hoping and hoping and hoping that Egypt, Jordan, or someone will save his butt at the end of this, because no one is stepping forward. And Trump has sort of withdrawn his offer in a very convoluted sort of way. He's still talking about the Gazans should live somewhere else, the Gazans should have a better life and such. But it's preposterous. They don't want to live somewhere else. They want to live in their land, on their farms, in their houses, next to their hospitals, which are all now going to be utterly annihilated. Already badly damaged and destroyed in many cases, but now they're going to be utterly annihilated. On top of all of that, they're going to starve the people to death, and are starving the people to death. And the small steps that Netanyahu is taking, because the international community has finally, especially the United Nations Undersecretary for Humanitarian Affairs, if you saw his interview, it was just preposterous that he had to say the things he said. And from the podium, he was saying them. This is disgusting. This is horrible. How can we raise our children in a land where we kill babies?
Right. I mean, I have heard people who I knew who never questioned Israel before now say Israel should not exist. I mean, it's the public opinion is starting to change. Do you think that this is a hopeful sign? Because people that I've known my whole life who had strange attachments to Israel and would say things like, if Israel falls, America will fall. sort of mouthing these platitudes like this, but now I've heard people like that say Israel just shouldn't exist. It was a terrible idea. I don't know how common that is, but I have heard things like that. It seems to be more common. So is this hopeful to you?
I think it is changing, but it's not changing fast enough. You know, when I was 12 years old, my father was a deacon in a Baptist church in Atlanta, Georgia, as I recall, on Wyuka Road. And I remember one time the preacher just going on and on about the crucifixion. And he told the story pretty accurately, as I was later to learn from my own history studies, about Rome and about Pontius Pilate and about Herod and about the Jews and about Christ and how it actually came about. And I'm thinking to myself, we're the empire. Rome was the empire then, of course. And Rome was frustrated with the Jews, frustrated with the Israelites. He was frustrated, and he didn't want, I'm not talking to the emperor so much as I am Pontius Pilate, who was the consul in that region. He didn't want to crucify Jesus. And the reason he crucified Jesus is because the people who are now killing babies and starving whole millions of people wanted him to. And he felt like he would rather put up with the injustice of crucifying a basically innocent man than put up with these boisterous Jews. And, where are we today? But the same place. The same place, except Israelite has been replaced by Israel. And I would be shot right now if Donald Trump got a hold of me for being an anti-Semite, and that's hogwash. I'm not an anti-Semite. I'm an anti-baby killer. And I think that's what's changing a lot of attitudes from France to Spain, all over the world. But it's not happening fast enough.
Some of the things that have happened are surprisingly brazen. The Microsoft shutting down the account of the email accounts of the ICC judge, who I did not consider to be, a firebrand, an anti-Western type person at all. I mean, how can this be something that we're dealing with?
Well, they are weaponizing anti-Semitism. I remember Jonathan Shanker making a statement a few years back. I think he was president of that egregious organization called Defense for Democracy or something like that. And Jonathan said in a meeting, and he was overheard and quoted, he said, we got to stop this anti-Semitism thing. It's running out of steam. Well, they've revived it. They've revived it big time, and they've weaponized it. Just like America and the empire we've become weaponized liberal democracy to go after Europe and Russia and China and a whole lot of other places. That's what we've done. No different from weaponizing Christianity with Richard Coeur de Lion, Richard the Lionhearted, and the Crusades and the Pope and all of that. That was weaponizing Christianity. It wasn't about Christianity. It was about territory and plunder. That's what the Crusades were about. Well, what we've done in the modern age is we've weaponized liberal democracy. And what we're really after, hegemony over Europe, destruction of Russia, ultimate destruction of China, and us having global hegemony by weaponizing liberal democracy. But the backlash has been horrible. The backlash is, I don't want anything to do with liberal democracy. I'll take autocracy, thank you. I'll take anything but liberal democracy because your example of liberal democracy is horrible. I don't want anything to do with it. And now we've got Europe in royal completely from Finland all the way down to the tip of Spain because of what we have done. And it's no different than what the Crusaders and what Pizarro and Cortez, in the name of Christianity, killing all the natives and taking their gold and their emeralds. And it's no different. It's the same thing, except now we have all these people who run around and talk about the rule of law and justice and humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, and we're going to feed these people. It's bullshit. We are exactly the way we were of old in this world. rapine, plunder, torture, murder, whatever, to make BlackRock some more money.
Right, and this is, I mean, it's liberal democracy, but if you start to look at the way the state functions domestically and internationally, it is illiberal. There's much censorship and manipulation of speech. There are things, extra legal measures taken. I mean, we still haven't even, we're not allowed to know what happened with the Kennedy assassination, for example. We overthrow governments around the world, violating the UN Charter and the U.S. Supremacy Clause statements about, ratified treaties as the supreme law of the land. So it's on top of like whether people want want liberal democracy or not. This is illiberal oligarchy in practice, and it's really obvious to anyone who looks at it objectively. I mean, is there a liberal democracy to even go back to once this thing crashes? Because I do think that this dollar, I feel like this system is much more precarious than we realize, and I now think that a crash of some kind could happen more quickly than we think. Given that with the liberal democracy thing isn't real, what paths are there for the U.S. with all of these crises mounting?
Well, you've said a lot to ponder there. Moody's has downgraded us again, and I think that's just a sign of the future. With approaching $40 trillion in aggregate debt, and not approaching, but paying $1 trillion in interest on that every year, soon to be $2 trillion if you believe the Congressional Budget Office. That's the equivalent of the defense budget, the entire defense budget being paid in interest payments on our debt. We can't keep that up. We can't sustain it. One of the reasons I think we're seeing, part of the reason anyway, this movement by BRICS and others towards an alternative mode of operation in the world. And I don't say an alternative currency, because a lot of the things they're experimenting with are throwbacks to the past. They're experimenting with commodity exchanges, with kind of trade we used to do, when guilds were prominent. You need this, I need that. You've got this, I've got that. Let's trade. China's doing an enormous amount of that in Southeast Asia, and other countries are cooperating. Now, they have a fundamental exchange mechanism in the renminbi, but nonetheless, they are doing things that are threatening ultimately to the dollar and its role as the transactional and the reserve currency in the world. And we're also seeing some unloading of U.S. treasuries from time to time by people who hold quite a few of them, China most prominently. I think it's a world that's moving, as I've said many times, in reverse of where it has been moving since, 500 years ago, certainly, and maybe you could say 1,000 years ago, when most of the empires in the world, the Mughal, the Mongol, the Ottoman, the Persian, one of the most powerful of all, the Eastern and Western Roman empires, and a host of others, were in the East. They were in the East. Even the Western Roman Empire, headquartered in Rome, depended a lot on the commerce with the East for its wherewithal, particularly with Southwest Asia. We're seeing that reverse, and China's the magnet of that reversal. But Central Asia is the road that reversal is encompassing and traveling on right now. We just opened the railroad it carried commerce into Iran from China. This is a railroad that goes from China to Iran. The other railroad the Chinese have completed was to debouch into Ukraine. And it goes through the steppes, if you will, and through Central Asia, through the Caucasus Mountains and such. And that railroad reduces Chinese shipping time from its Pacific ports to Europe to 16 hours. It was 2.5 days. With the ruckus in the Red Sea, it may be 3.5 days now. But this is going to reduce it to 16 hours. It's rail. They can't debouch, as it were, because Ukraine's in war right now. But it's ready to go. That's one of the reasons we are doing Ukraine. Thank you very much, because we don't want the Chinese to have that capacity. I think the Iranian railroad sneaked up on us. I'm sure our intelligence people knew that it was happening, but that it was going to produce a rail. I forget how many cars were on this first train, but good, it was enormous. It stretched into the distance beyond my ability to see. And it's delivering goods to Iran and taking goods back to China now. So the world's moving on. Power is shifting. Power is shifting through Europe and back to the East from whence it came. Cultural, economic, financial, intelligence, military. It's all shifting back to the East. And we're desperately trying to stem that shift. And we have a president who has any means intellectually to comprehend what I just said.
And the Chinese position in this changing world would seem to be very desirable because they largely have to tell the truth about what they are doing in foreign policy terms. They build railroads in Africa. The West intentionally kept Africa free of having much infrastructure at all because the amount of railroads that were built in Africa, for example, in this era of Western dominance for the last few centuries is pathetic. It's shocking, actually, if you look at it. I mean, China can tell the truth about the benefits of these sort of projects and how they increase economic development in the countries that have been neglected and sort of kept on the periphery for a long time and imperialized and neo-colonized in different ways. And all the U.S. really has is lies about what it brings, what its intentions are. I mean, the U.S. wants debt peonage and subservience and basing rights, and we might just kill you en masse like in Gaza. I mean,
absolutely, we will sanction you or we will kill you. Those are our two offerings to the world.
Yeah, I mean, even in Africa, I suspect that a lot of these like terrorist groups, where we have military bases somewhere because there's this terror group that's there, but I have to believe Western intelligence is behind these groups, that they create them so that they have a pretext to train all the soldiers in the country and the officers. Like, I mean, the statecraft of the U.S. is just horrific, and I don't see China as doing those things, and I don't see it as in their interest to do those things. No. Whereas our whole model is built on just screwing everyone constantly, and then we're like, come on, world, get on board. Don't you want to just be screwed forever? I mean, how can we win that battle?
That's the empire. I got an email this morning from a man I'd never even heard of. Very erudite individual, apparently. He wrote a great email and attached some great attachments to it that he'd written, including a letter to the president of either New York University or Columbia. I can't remember which now, but he had heard me talk about how we are not so much enthralled to the Israel lobby, as Mearsheimer maintains, for example, as we are using Israel to do our dirty work. We like the lobby as a patina of excuse for what we do, but we're using Israel. They're our attack dog in that part of the world. Well, he was wanting to tell me and gave me some facts to verify. They're our attack dog in Africa and in South America, too. They're in those places wreaking havoc. Incidentally, so is the UAE, little Sparta in Sudan, for example, supporting one side in the war there. So, I mean, we're using Israel in many respects to do our dirty work, particularly dirty work that Mossad just loves to do, just like the CIA. Mossad and the CIA are so tight, it's like lips and teeth, as Mao said. We use Israel to do our dirty work in a lot of places, including South America and Africa. And we have just been rebuffed and rebuffed again in Africa by countries that have figured it out. The worst decision we made, when Powell was chairman, Colin Powell was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he fought this tooth and nail, and he won, changing the Unified Command Plan to put a unified command in Africa, to militarize U.S. policy towards Africa. And then along came Bill Clinton, wonderful Bill Clinton, worst president in the post-World War II era, and others who went ahead and changed the command plan and created African Command. And ever since, our entire policy in Africa is military.
Right, and if you look into the case of Rwanda, I mean, there are aspects of it that look a lot more like a Western regime change sort of operation, because the guy Kagame was trained by the U.S., he was backed by the U.S., he was doing a lot of killing up to even before they shot down the plane of that president, and that's what sparked the Rwanda genocide, as it's called. But this was a very sinister thing, and it did move the Rwanda out of the French camp into the U.S. side, basically.
Yeah. What we have been, our fingerprints are all over Africa and its tragedies, all over South America and its tragedies. Pick a country, and if they've had a tragedy, you'll find the empire there. Whether it's Guatemala, Chile, Argentina, Bolivia. You pick a country and you can find one.
And I agree with you that the CIA seems to have outsourced a lot of its dirtiest tricks to Mossad, but I think that this has not been entirely a decision of the U.S. As I've studied these clandestine, events in the sort of deep political history of this empire. It seems like there's been Israel has blackmailed the U.S. in different ways over some things. A lot of the scandals that have come out, Watergate, Iran-Contra, they dealt with eras where the mob alliance with the CIA, between the CIA and the organized crime syndicate, were kind of up for grabs. I mean, it's very strange if you look at it. Meyer Lansky gets indicted for the first time. He flees to Israel, and then Watergate breaks out. And Watergate may well trace back to James Angleton and his guy, James McCord. I mean, it looks like Nixon was taken down that way. And it's also very weird that in 1986, the U.S. finally indicts Santo Trafficante, who was Lansky's successor. And then he died shortly thereafter. But then Iran-Contra breaks out, and there's all of these drug things there. Some of the stories that exposed Iran-Contra come from Lebanon, may have been leaked by Israel. I mean, I think that Israel does control that aspect of the black bag jobs, but I think that they have kind of insisted on that, and they have so much dirt on us that that's been a part of the story. But that's a pretty radical thesis, I guess. But I have some evidence for it. It's very circumstantial, but it seems like that's happened.
The only thing I would disagree with there, it could happen from time to time, both ways. These kinds of things work both ways. I think it's more complicity. I don't think anybody's trying to blackmail anybody. Occasionally, someone might get tiffed or something, and then a little of that happens. But it's in concert. We're doing it together.
Can our system function without all of the criminality? That's my question, and I don't actually think it can in this way. And I think that's the fundamental heart of it.
If you've read Misha Glenny's, it's a little old now, maybe 20 years, I guess. Mafia, then it was $5 trillion annually, and the centers were Tel Aviv. That was one of the biggest centers of money laundering as well as orchestration of these they are global criminal networks for trafficking in people, trafficking in illicit drugs, trafficking in arms, trafficking in stolen automobiles. Montenegro is at the top of the list for that one. You can check your Mercedes into the valet at a Montenegrin hotel of the greatest stature, and the next morning they'll tell you it's gone. It's on a boat headed for Italy. It's got new license plates, new paint job, and it's headed out. And we made them a member of NATO now, mind you, Montenegro. So I think probably what Misha said then is doubled now. You probably have $10 trillion of illicit trade in the world, which oils everyone from BlackRock to HSBC. Name your bank, name whomever you want to do that deals in money in those kind of amounts, and they're complicit. It's a backdrop to everything that is white that goes on in the world. White in terms of legal, or at least quasi-legal. This is all illegal, and it's underneath, and it is orchestrated out of places like Doha and Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv was #1 in Misha's book, and New York City, and other places like that. I don't know if you know this, but HBO made a movie out of Misha's book. And they started it out with some great British actors, and they started it out essentially showing Tel Aviv for what it was. It got pulled. It got pulled in Israel first, and then it got pulled in the United States. There was a great drama, and it was pretty faithful to the book that Misha wrote. But you don't want to do that. You don't want to show that capital of Israel at the time as the capital of crime in the world. And New York City and Doha as complicit as any other place. There were other cities too, but they were the three prominent ones: Doha, Tel Aviv, and New York City. New York City does a lot of money laundering, a lot of money laundering. And, you know, who knows that other than people who have read Misha's book, which is a very limited audience. And the people practicing it.
Yeah, and I mean, Meyer Lansky in the 40s said that the mob is bigger than U.S. Steel. And then 1945, Harry Truman secretly gives Meyer Lansky the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Meyer Lansky founded Las Vegas to launder drug money from this drug connection he'd set up with this guy named Harold Meltzer in Mexico. And that's the whole reason we have Las Vegas as a money laundering center. And the Teamsters were there giving all these loans to build up Vegas. And then, but a lot of the money that was there was presumably laundered drug money. But it's like all this illusion of, this glittering palace in the desert, but it's all fake. And who knows how much of it is drug money, but a lot of it is not gambling, other rackets too. And we know Lansky and Hoffa both were active in arming the Zionists in 1948. I mean, this underworld aspect of it, I think is a huge part of our history, and it's so shrouded in kind of denial to the present day that we don't even really know our own history. But I think we know enough to say we're kind of ruled by gangsters, but made in a serious way.
I think you're right. I think the one point Smedley Butler missed when he testified before the Congress, that he was a criminal for capitalism for 30 years as a Marine general or Marine up to general. Won 2 medals of honor too. It was in China, Nicaragua, Haiti, all over the globe. And he compared himself to Al Capone, and he denigrated Al Capone, saying all he had was 2 states. Smedley himself had 2 continents. Well, that's maybe true, Smedley, but it also is true that you were operating that whole military mechanism for a much bigger conglomerate of crime than Al Capone. You were doing it for the empire, and the empire made Al Capone look like petty cash.
Yeah, I mean, it is so corrupt. It's a corrupt enterprise, but the mafia and imperialism have indistinguishable logics when you break it down. And speaking of a mafia corrupted place, we haven't talked about Ukraine, but the slaughter continues there. And it's another. That one's even harder to understand because it doesn't seem that the Ukrainians have any way. The more they stay, it only gets worse for them, and yet they can't stop. So, stop participating in this. So, do you have any predictions here?
When I was at State from 2000, really, I was there from 2000 to 2005, but 2002 to 2005, I was working partly on Ukraine, and Deputy Secretary of State Rich Armitage, now just passed away, was watching Beth Jones, the Assistant Secretary for Eurasia. And so I knew that there was a watchful eye over that particular Assistant Secretariat, but I delved in it every now and then. And the first time I did was when I had to deal with a number of Ukrainians who were as corrupt as anybody I'd ever dealt with in my life. And I remember at one point I was hoping Yulia Tymoshenko was coming in, a telecommunications giant in Ukraine, and I was, female, fairly attractive woman, looked like she was competent, and her experience in telecommunications sort of indicated she might have some business acumen. I thought, well, we're finally going to get someone who's not totally and utterly corrupt, whether they be Russian or more Ukrainian in terms of their bent, politically or otherwise. She was as corrupt as anybody else, and so was the next person and the next person. I finally told Secretary Powell, we don't want anything to do with that country. That country is one criminal cesspool. And I was working at that time the other criminal cesspool in the world, North Korea. And you know, I was going to meetings of the secret working group, top secret code word working group, that we were 70 people in that group, everybody from Secret Service to FBI, you name it. And one of the things that we concluded in that working group, and I can talk about this because this wasn't classified, is that North Korea was a criminal state. They were counterfeiting our money to the tune of maybe $20 billion a year. They were counterfeiting cigarettes. They were counterfeiting cigarettes complete with the California tax stamp on it, for example, or the New York tax stamp. I mean, it was incredible. We intercepted a ship with over $1 billion, get this now, container ship, $1 billion of counterfeit cigarettes on it. And you know, took that down. But they were a criminal state. Well, that's the conclusion I gave the Secretary of State, my view of Ukraine after working with it. It's a criminal state. There is no one in Ukraine other than beneath, you know, the so-called lower classes, is what the Ukrainians in Kyiv would say. They were just going about their business and not doing too well because the uppers were stealing everything in sight. So when we got, in my time it stayed significantly involved in beginning to build Ukraine up to be a bulwark in NATO against Russia, my conclusion was this is idiocy. This is total idiocy. And then when we brought Albania and Montenegro and these other countries who couldn't pass the smell test to get into NATO, you know, NATO had credentials. You had to be a liberal, practicing, functioning democracy. You had to have anti-corruption campaign. You had to do all these things in order to be a member of NATO, just like the EU. We didn't care. You could come into NATO if you could straggle across the line with your AK dragging the ground. It didn't matter. That was Bill Clinton. Let's go to 32 countries. We're now at 32 countries. Imagine if the American people knew that they are giving their nuclear umbrella under an Article 5 type agreement to Montenegro, Albania, and other countries they don't even know where they are on a map. That's what we're doing today. It's idiocy. And Ukraine is the biggest part of that idiocy.
I mean, we created a mafia state with Kosovo on purpose. Yes. So, and we knew what we were doing. We knew who the KLA was. We partnered them with Al-Qaeda.
Ukraine is much bigger than Kosovo.
Yeah. So, but there's this terrible loss of life. But is Ukraine going to continue to be a state after this? If they're headed towards unconditional surrender, you wonder. And then if Ukraine ceases to be a state, is that the worst thing, given that how corrupt the whole political culture was?
I don't think Putin, whom I judge to be an incredibly prudent man, I don't think he wants the whole of Ukraine because he knows the history. Putin is a historian, and he knows the history of Ukraine. He would have partisans and guerrillas down his back for the rest of eternity. And so he doesn't want all of Ukraine. He just wants those portions that he has already pretty much taken.
Right. And maybe Odessa.
He doesn't want Odessa unless he has to have it. If you've ever read Alan First's books, which are better than most people's histories, you know Odessa has always been a pain in its own side and a criminal city, a criminal district. I don't think he wants it. His military wants it. His military salivates over it, especially his Navy, because then they got the whole northern rim of the Black Sea. And then bring your carrier battle groups into the Black Sea. Bring your strike forces into the Black Sea, U.S. empire. I've got the whole rim of the Black Sea. You're going to only operate in the Black Sea as my missiles dictate. That's what his military wants it for. Because then they'd have, I forget the name of the port that's to the east of Sevastopol, and then they got Sevastopol and Crimea, and then they'd have that one, Odessa. They'd have the whole northern rim of the Black Sea. I don't think we might do something about that. If he does move on Odessa, we might do something about that. It might change the whole complexion. I think Putin knows that. But that's not to say that, as Clausewitz said, once you start winning and rolling, your expectations increase. your desire grows. And I think he's getting angry. And I don't blame him for getting angry. They've said over and over again, Sergei Lavrov, Putin himself. We have to deal with the root causes. And the root causes are clear. They're the same root causes that JFK and his ex-com had to deal with when Soviet nuclear-tipped missiles were going into Cuba. They're the same root causes. You cannot do that so close to our territory. And we will go to war over it, nuclear war if necessary. That's how you have to deal with this. Those are the root causes that Putin sees. And they're, in my view, as a military professional, they're genuine root causes. You were too close. You were going to put missiles in the eastern part of Ukraine, 600 miles maybe from some very vulnerable targets around Moscow. And we're not going to allow that. That's an existential threat to the CSTO, the Collective Security Treaty Organization, the equivalent of NATO on their side, and to Russia, more importantly, the latter. And we're not going to let you do that. So you have to back up from that. That means no NATO membership. That means neutrality forever. That means no, not even a semblance of a NATO troop on Ukrainian soil. No NATO facilities on Ukrainian soil. Neutrality forever, as I said. And you got to go to those root causes. You got to deal with them. Trump doesn't want to do that because it looks like a loss for him. Just as maybe the deal with Iran that he's working on right now, Witkoff is working on, might turn out to look like a loss for him. Because the Iranians are not going to give up enrichment, period. 3.7%, they might limit it to that as they did under the JCPOA and have any other uranium enriched to a higher percentage held in a third country and given to them only when they need it for cancer treatment or whatever. They might agree to that, but they're not going to agree to give up the perfect right under the Non-Proliferation Treaty to which they are a signatory, including the additional protocol and the Safeguards Agreement. They're not going to give up their right to enrich. And I'm being told by people who seem to know what they're talking about that that's become a sine qua non for Trump. So you're not going to get an agreement. You're going to get a war.
That's when that's where it kind of breaks down to me, though. How would they be able to orchestrate this in a way that has any pretense of legitimacy? And even if they were, how does it work out?
Bibi would start it.
Yeah,
I think he would start it. That's his last card to flip over, on the table. That's his last card. When he's really going to jail, when they're finally going to get rid of him, he's going to bring out the big bear. And Israel's going to be dead.
That is, that I do wonder how they would survive, because it seems like when they did launch that last attack on Iran, that they weren't able to get past the air defenses. My understanding is that Russia in the interim has only strengthened their air defenses, and that Iran has a huge arsenal of missiles that are spread in too many locations to possibly take out. So there would be a counterattack to any real. I mean, the last attack was so ineffective that Iran, even though Iran had a right to respond to it, they haven't. And you can argue that it didn't even warrant a response because it was so weak. I mean, how does this possibly work out to the benefit of the U.S./Israel?
It doesn't. It's a scenario for ultimate takedown of the state of Israel and extinguishing it from Southwest Asia and the Levant, and a significant, if not empire cracking at least, for America. It would be a blow of incredible proportions to an empire that's already showing signs of demise, serious signs, not to even mention a deficit in leadership that is astronomical. I think it might be the unraveling.
Right, I do as well, and then I think it's very much related to it, because these 21st century wars have really been the cause of our downfall, and because of this downfall, it's going to leave the neocons and Zionists in a really bad position, but they were the ones who took us on this path anyway. And that brings me to this question of, let's say Israel is able to exterminate all of the people in Gaza, and they have that strip of land. How does that possibly change the overall geopolitical balance of power in the world? Is it that piece of real estate is not so valuable, and yet the U.S. seems to have, and the West has so destroyed its whatever mythical legitimacy it still had, I would say, is gone, and the balance of material power is no longer on their side. It just seems the most destructive, senseless, ultimately pointless and self-defeating thing, even if they succeed, I would guess. But do you see there a scenario for them to achieve victory in Gaza and take over the rest of the West Bank, and then it's somehow going to save the Western Empire? It still seems to be in such a bad condition.
What I see is if Netanyahu goes ahead with this sustained military operation, there are some huge questions. First question is, where do you bury 2 million people? Second question, because they're not going anywhere. They're not going anywhere. No matter what Trump does, no matter what Sisi does, no matter what the King of Jordan does, no matter what anybody does, they're not going anywhere. The bulk of them. Second, you are entering the same military territory with far more already hurting forces than we did in 2003 when we entered Iraq. And you're entering the same kind of environment now. Your principal enemy will be a 3-man team with an IED made from a bomb you dropped that didn't explode, of which there are aplenty now in Gaza. Not only that, you have rubbled the terrain in Gaza to the point where it is absolutely perfect guerrilla territory. We had a better deal in Fallujah and Al Anbar province in general in Iraq because we hadn't rubbled everything, not everything. They have rubbled everything. Every single corner of every single building is a guerrilla hideaway now. So they're going to take enormous casualties. They already had a Makava tank hit by a 250-pound American bomb that was rigged as an IED and took out the whole crew and the whole tank. That's what's going to happen to them. They're not used to these kinds of casualties. They have a post-traumatic stress number now that the rehabilitation division in the IDF reports at 7,500 troops. Netanyahu has ordered many of those troops out of the hospital and back into the field. Reservists, which constitute the bulk of the Israeli army now, are refusing to go back. They're refusing to report. They have taken more casualties, KIA and WIA, than they've ever taken before in this sort of operation. Morale is not so high amongst the reservists in particular, who compose the bulk of the IDF, and they're in trouble. They're fighting on a number of fronts, and they're in trouble. And he is going to put them into a disaster if he goes ahead with these plans to put them in harm's way in this guerrilla perfect territory. And Hamas, who now have 40,000 fighters, they have more than they had on October the 7th. All they need is an 18-year-old with an AK and a few rounds and the ability to put together an IED, an improvised explosive device. And they got plenty of that. So this is a recipe for the end of the Israeli Defense Force. And Netanyahu will be the maestro who directed it all.
And is there, do they have any prayer of being able to largely destroy the human population just through aerial bombing? I mean, is that even feasible, or no. Would they? That's the reason
they're starving them. They see Ben-Gvir, Smotrich, and others see starvation as their best weapon. That's the reason they're so furious with Netanyahu now, because he's at least made some overtures about 4 trucks or 8 trucks or whatever. They need about 500 trucks a day. But he's talking about this going in and that going in and allowing this or allowing that. And Trump is kind of, forcing him to do at least something. And of course, the radicals in his government are furious with him because they want everybody starved to death. Man, woman, child, dog, cat, they want everybody starved to death. And they will tell you that to your face.
Right. The things that they've said are just so shocking now. It's not it's for early on, beyond the point that it was deniable, it was frustrating to hear people try and say, oh, this isn't really a genocide. We can look at definitions, yada, yada. It's so obvious now. And that is where I feel like the whole of the Enlightenment and like human reason is just standing here. I don't even know how to describe the madness of this moment. I mean,
we put the car in complete reverse. Complete reverse. We're taking Geneva, we're taking the conventions, we're taking everything that came out of Nuremberg, we're taking all the law we've developed, humanitarian law, all the law of warfare we've developed, and we're saying it isn't worth anything when we're killing Palestinians. They deserve to die. They're subhuman. That's what it's doing.
Yes, it really is an astounding moment. Do you have any hope that Trump, because it's so clear where this is heading, or that this is likely a disaster for both Zionism and for the U.S., and thus for Trump himself, do you have any hope that maybe Trump's ego would be enough to motivate him to do the right thing, because otherwise he will look so horrible, unambiguously horrible in history? I mean, is there any hope for this?
I do hold out a scintilla of hope. And his remarks, some of his remarks, which it was clear he didn't write, someone wrote them for him, he couldn't even pronounce capital Afghanistan correctly. But his remarks, the fact that he delivered them, gave me a little bit of hope that he was seeing some daylight. He was seeing the tragedy of what's happening. And Vance is canceling his stop in Jerusalem, and Trump not going at all on a, quote, Mideast trip, unquote, to Israel, gives me a little bit of hope, but not a lot. Not a lot.
Do you think that there's any significance to Rubio being such a strange Secretary of State, kind of relegated to like almost, constitutional monarchy sort of thing, where he just shows up and look at me, I'm the Secretary of State? Or, I mean, that does suggest maybe Trump is sick of this brand of neoconservatism, but what does it matter if you're tied to the hip to Miriam Adelson?
Yeah, I think he is sick of it. I think he's been sick of it for some time for personal reasons. I think he detests Bibi Netanyahu. But he doesn't know how to get out of it, and he's surrounded by people who aren't sick of it. Rubio being case in point. Hegseth, another case in point. Waltz was a case in point. Waltz he got rid of because Waltz was cheating on him with regard to the Iran talks and cheating on Witkoff. But you're right about Rubio. Rubio, he's a strange animal now. Supposedly both National Security Advisor and Secretary of State, a la Henry Kissinger. But he doesn't seem to have any consequential role unless he carves it out himself, like going to Ankara or to Turkey to the NATO talks, while Trump is supposed to be focused on getting Putin into Istanbul and talking about Ukraine. It just didn't look very smooth at all. And Rubio looks like Vance has convinced Trump that he ought to be the presidential candidate, not Rubio. And that probably annoys Rubio. So he's going to be working on that hard.
Yeah. The last question here, your friend, Ben Cohen, was in front. He interrupted some congressional proceedings the other day. How do you feel about the efforts of private citizens like him who can draw attention to this? Is this important? Is this significant? Does it mean anything for us? Is it hopeful?
I think every little bit like that helps. I'm reminded of what a former jurist and humanitarian lawyer of great repute said to me in Syracuse, Sicily, one time when I asked him one night. We were all sitting around drinking some excellent Italian wine and eating some excellent Italian food about 2200 in the evening after a really long day. And I looked at him and I said, Sir Nigel, does what we're doing really mean a damn thing? And he looked at me and he said, Larry, we bother the buggers. He was right. Every little thing like that. Ben Cohen in that hearing, every little thing like that. Josie Gobo getting carried out on the arms of the security people of another hearing. Both of them are from Eisenhower Media Network. each one carves a little niche out of the hardcore, murderous, barbarous, imperial assholes who run America now, in the legislature, on the Supreme Court, and in the White House. And
well, we need a lot more of this.
At BlackRock and State Group and Vanguard.
Yes, they need to be cut down to size, and world history does that to empires, and that may be what we're seeing now. And so we're going to continue to try to do our part, and I salute you for being out there and speaking about this as someone who has some experience in these higher circles. It's good, it's refreshing to hear from someone speak about these things without having drank the Kool-Aid, and you're not out here shilling for Lockheed or anything like that. So I really admire how you've spent your retirement. So thanks again so much, Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, for joining us.
Thanks for having me. And Aaron, we're all dead. Rich Armitage is dead. Colin Powell is dead. Alma Powell, his wife, is dead. My wife is dead. I have a picture on the wall. I'm the only one still alive in it.
Well, I'm happy. I'm thankful for that. So until next time, thanks again, Larry.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks to Dana Chavarria for producing this episode, and thank you for tuning in. Please do consider subscribing to the American Exception podcast on Patreon. The URL is patreon.com/American Exception. Either way, please do like this video and subscribe to this American Exception channel. Also, I'd like to thank some of the outlets I've appeared on recently, including in Serbia, the Political Propaganda Program, and 2 American shows, Captive Minds with Max Perry and Shayna Batterson, and The Katie Halper Show. I do my best to accept all serious interview requests because we need more collaboration and solidarity. In other words, we need less cliquishness and less obsessiveness with this or that or our own respective brand. We need to stop thinking in terms of brands this way. We really need to work to do our best to contribute to a dialogue that might someday inform a consensus against the rapacious insanity that prevails today. I really believe that. Given how different our backgrounds are, I'm fascinated by how close Larry Wilkerson and I are in terms of our assessments of the prospects and desirability of continued U.S. hegemony. Larry is retired and old enough that he could understandably leave public life behind, but he's still here working to remain engaged in politics and doing lots of interviews, even with obscure academic dissidents like me, because I suppose we are called on to bring light to the devil's chessboard.